Hello and welcome to Perspectives, the weekly edition. I'm Sebastian Gomes. 2017 marks not only the 150th birthday of Canada, but also the 50th birthday of one of the most unique and effective global development organizations, the Canadian Catholic Organization for Development and Peace. 50 years of solidarity, today on Perspectives, the weekly edition. Joining me today are two guests who are very familiar with the work of Development and Peace. Anne-Marie Jackson worked for many years in the organization as a regional facilitator, program coordinator, and then director for the English sector. Today she is the director of the Jesuit Forum for Social Faith and Justice, based here in Toronto. And Father Bill Ryan is a Jesuit priest and economist. He was Director of Social Affairs for the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops 50 years ago when Development and Peace was founded, and he later served as the Bishops' Conference General Secretary. He's the author of numerous publications on Catholic social teaching, globalization, and interfaith dialogue, and is widely recognized as a preeminent voice in the field of social and economic justice in the Canadian Church. Today, Father Bill works with Anne-Marie at the Jesuit Forum for Social Faith and Justice as a special advisor. And we'll let you know more about the Jesuit Forum a bit later in the show. But thank you both very much for being here today.
Thank you.
Anne-Marie, let's start with you. I want to talk about this word solidarity, which is the theme of the 50 years of Development and Peace. It's one of the integral words to their identity. But what is solidarity and why is it so integral?
And it's also a principle of Catholic social teaching,
right.
Just I might add. It's solidarity to me is about people, about walking with people, accompanying, being together. It's a very give and take kind of a relationship, and it's an ongoing relationship. It's a very rich term, and it's really a kind of, it's hard to kind of you can't really define it in one or two words, really. It's
a very dynamic word. It's an action word, right?
Yeah, it is.
Let's look at the context that Development and Peace developed out of. Father Bill, you remember, the 1960s and the energy that was unleashed by the Second Vatican Council and the experience that the Canadian bishops had at that council, coming back to Canada, and then felt, hey, we need to do something. So they created Development and Peace. But what was that energy that inspired them?
Well, I experienced it first in my office because the bishops were away and I practically had the building to myself. But they'd left me work the 900-page document on Medicare by Justice Hall. What was remarkable for me, I had no experience at that time of working with bishops, but as the bishops came back from the council, they were free men. They could talk freely and think about ideas. In fact, within months, I had an experience that I just helped begin. I went to a labor conference down in Niagara Falls, and the three leaders of the unions asked to see me for dinner. I was nobody, but they said, you think the bishops of Canada would join us, the labor force, to work for Medicare? And I said, I'll find out. I went back, and within days I was able to say, yes, they will. And they had no background to do that before. You also had this freedom, again, poverty was on their mind, and while they were talking about Medicare, we were planning, this was ecumenically, a conference on world poverty, but also local poverty. And it brought together some of the experts from around the world, but again, there was over 40 NGOs were part of that. It's same thing, they had a world conference on theology, bringing theologians from all over for a conference. So you just felt you were riding a wave, and you could get an idea, and tomorrow it could make it happen. So why not have Development and Peace?
Now, it was a creation of the Canadian bishops. Is it fair to say that establishing Development and Peace, the Canadian bishops were pioneering something, that they were They were in the vanguard of this type of movement?
Not really. The formula maybe, but already in the last session of the Vatican Council, working on the document Church in the World, Gaudium et Spes, the American Bishop Swanstrom, he was proposing that they have such a organization at the international level. And so it was getting talked about. And finally, in chapter 90 of Gaudium et Spes, it has that proposal. Again, it's still at the international level that we have to have something like that, though, education as well as especially focused on the poor countries. That would be 65. In 66, almost seemed like out of the blue, Cardinal Leger and also Archbishop Pocock of Toronto, they both proposed different formula of having such an organization in Canada. Within a short time, the general secretaries had organized a group of 14 men, usually representing NGOs from across the country, and they gave the first skeleton. Yes, this should be done. They called it Canada Aid. The big meeting of the bishops was in October 66, at which the bishops finally were saying, get to go ahead and get on the process underway. They had the last meeting, or the planning meeting, and the bishops said, it's yours. And by that time, they had planned how they would get a director. And then the bishop stepped back, and the Board of Governors took over. And that would be in June 67.
Now, the organization is obviously very unique, Anne-Marie, but what was attractive about it to you when you got involved? Why do people look at development and peace and say, hey, yeah, this is something I should be a part of?
Well, I got involved in my own parish, which I didn't find a lot of life in. The parish, I didn't find a lot of life in the parish, but suddenly I was invited to an action by this group, Development and Peace, and it was signing cards to prisoners in the Philippines. And I thought, I don't know what that's about, but that sounds interesting. And having done that, I came back the next year when they did another action, and it was at that point that I sort of was interested. I said, this is really interesting. This is making sense of why I come to church every Sunday, in a sense. And I got involved in the group, small group, tiny group, but I learnt so much through the group itself, through sessions that we organized, retreats that we organized, through then going on an exposure tour to meet partners in the Global South, through meeting partners from the Global South in Canada, even in my parish, etc. And so, I mean, quite honestly, I was kind of on fire with my group, and started a Bible study group as well, because I thought, well, I need to understand the Bible more now. See, right. So it was a real formation, a faith formation process for me.
And this is such a unique thing about the organization that's there from the beginning, that it taps into the local church, that, like you said, you encountered the organization yes. at the parish level. Mm-hmm. And from the very beginning, that was going to be the identity of this organization, this Canadian Catholic organization, that it was member-based in the parishes. Why is that an important structure?
From the discussions, right from the beginning, the bishops wanted the whole church. French and English, which already had, difficulties, but also new energies. And they knew that it had to get down to the parishes, because otherwise it would stay at the episcopal level. I think what's important here is that they also wanted to be independent. It's very clear the bishops in their first formulations are not talking about, the bishops controlling. They're talking about the 19 first governors being lay people, and then there'll be 2 bishops also. So that's an amazing confidence. Because there was nothing like that before, and suddenly you have a new organization where the money has to come from the parishes, most of it. Later you'll have matching funds. So that action I'd give it to thinking of all the things, that's probably the single most important. First of all, it's realistic, but it's also that they weren't afraid. They weren't afraid to go ahead on this.
And for that reason, they could create something that was independent and lay run. Yeah.
Yes, and in both languages, coast to coast, and I think that's why it's had its longevity. I think that's why it's been around with, yes, a lot of challenges, a lot of difficulties. It's a very complex organization, but it's last 50 years at this point, I think because of that kind of, the way it was established as an independent organization and throughout Canada.
You mentioned the whole dynamic of being totally bilingual. Everything is in French, everything is in English. We know that the headquarters of Development and Peace is in Montreal, but it's really across the country. Talk to me a little bit about that dynamic. Emery, I know you worked in the English sector. Mm-hmm. It's not always the easiest dynamic to have both French and English, but it's also incredibly enriching. Just speak about that a little bit.
Terrifically enriching. I mean, it's one of the things I really enjoyed very much about Development and Peace was this fact. And there's very few organizations that have managed to sustain themselves as bilingual as Development and Peace still is today. But I think it was the force of, in many ways, a lot of the staff who were led by good managers, I guess, but also by their own commitment to the idea of working together, even against some serious difficulties working in the two languages and doing everything together. And, you know, we had a lot of very lively, to put it mildly, discussions about whatever it was we were planning to do together. We were always in meetings together here in Montreal or Toronto, and in each speaking your own language, so you just have to understand the other language. And it did work, even if, as I say, nothing is perfect, but it worked very well and very enriching and very exciting, really.
Just one addition, the fact that it was also French could benefit from the fact that the French Canadian Church is all over the world. They have missionaries everywhere, and most of those missionaries are involved in development of some kind. Mm-hmm. So again, you had a new support coming from the friends of those missionaries, but also the fact that you had a personal link.
We have to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll look at the unique approach to development that Development and Peace uses, what the relationship with the partners in the Global South looks like, and how Pope Francis has created a new energy and impulse for social justice throughout the Catholic Church. Stay with us. Welcome back. Today we're looking at Development and Peace, who are celebrating their 50th anniversary this year in 2017. And with us today are Anne-Marie Jackson and Father Bill Ryan of the Jesuit Forum for Social Faith and Justice. And I want to read an excerpt from a pastoral letter that the bishops wrote way back in 1968 when Development and Peace was just launching, just getting off the ground. Here's what the bishop said. This organization, it is hoped, will engage all Canadian Catholics in every diocese and every parish in contributing to a common fund whose primary purpose is the development of needy nations. Far from wishing to work in seclusion, we keenly desire to learn from and work in close harmony with other churches, private associations, and with governmental and international services. No account will be taken of the religious belief or ideologies of the people to whom aid is given. The only consideration will be the intrinsic worth of the projects, their conformity with the criteria of priority, and the evaluation of their human and social effectiveness. These are the considerations that led the Canadian bishops to launch the Canadian Catholic Organization for Development and Peace, now an independent lay organization drawing its membership from responsible citizens in every part of Canada and showing an image of the post-council church in which laity works in close collaboration with bishops and priests. That was a part of the pastoral letter that the bishops wrote introducing development and peace to our country and to the world. Father Bill, when you hear that, you think what?
I think a great satisfaction, because that's what I felt we lived. There was definitely this emphasis, it's going to be the laity that'll carry this. It also, they had no fear of, of control, or losing control. And also, it's important today to say it, because over time, one of the temptations has been to say, oh no, it was never conceived independently. So and as always, there's some people in a group would like to see it more docile to the bishops. But that letter shows that the mission given is independent, and it's not qualified, even to say what ideology or whatever.
Let's switch over to look at the approach to development that DNP takes. It's unique. It's not just about providing aid, emergency aid, or giving charity. It's a whole other approach. Anne-Marie, what's unique about the approach to development?
It's integral human development, meaning whole, entire development of the person to be fully human, really. What's interesting about development peace is I think it works both ways. In other words, integral human development for people in the global south, which is the first sort of focus, but also the way it works is it also fosters that same kind of development, I think, in people in Canada, people who are involved with development and peace. I mean, I always think what I understood was when the bishops came back from Vatican II, that was the first time they had met their brother bishops from around the world, and they were saying, you've been kind, compassionate, caring, you've helped us out for over many, many years, decades, in terms of our needs. However, we need you to do something different now. We need you to look at why is it that people are poor, why is it that people are marginalized, and make a change. And so, hence the approach is about addressing the root causes of poverty and injustice. And people sometimes people have trouble with the word, what does that mean exactly, justice, social justice, but it really means, and I think actually Pope Benedict said this, but I haven't got the exact quote, but it really means giving back to people what actually belongs to them. So in that sense, it's not charity in the sense of just giving to people in need of our riches, but rather we actually owe people their basic human rights. We owe that. So it's a unique kind of development or work in that it's very much, development peace from the beginning fostered strong relationships with people in the global south, with groups that were already in many cases organized, working with people who are poor and marginalized, and they listened to those people. They built relationships and listened and helped to form and shape the program that then Development and Peace would help to carry out. So that means a twofold program, meaning supporting these groups in the global south, and by the same token doing a program of education and action in Canada to support that program.
It's an interesting point you make, and I know that education is important to both of you. Development and Peace has been doing its work for 50 years, which is an amazing accomplishment. Education is a key, but as you said, Anne-Marie, these ideas can be complex and certainly difficult to really, get going. But where are we after 50 years of being conscious of this way of thinking about transforming the world, about bringing about social justice? Have we been effective, or is there still work to be done?
Well, first of all, what I wanted to put in was that one of the reasons why there was hope, this looking from a secular point of view, it's just at that time I was in graduate economics, and we were saying there was a time that every country would eventually take off time. Well, that turned out to be baloney.
In terms of development.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
what it did do, though, for any group, it gave them hope. You know, they were not just saying it religiously motivations, but they had grounds to see that science was saying that these countries would change. You can definitely show, the history is there, how the help from the first world has helped groups, small groups, villages, of course, hunger. I can give all those things. Have they helped to change the system? That's not hard to say. I think that's right now what the Pope's asking about. The distribution of power, especially irresponsible power or unaccountable power, is what we got to look at. And that's where education is getting rougher right now. People, including the Pope, they're naming things that they didn't name in the past.
Mm-hmm.
For instance, the Pope in Laudato Si, he talks about the power of the multinational corporations, who really are unaccountable in many ways. But to answer your question, it's very difficult to say exactly what progress you make. And in education, I think the best thing we can do is to pretty well pick up the situation the way the Pope is saying it. You don't look for certitudes, but you look where energy is, what is moving, and build on it.
And you invite people really into a process of change. I mean, yes, it's. I mean, I can think some instances where you could perhaps see some of the results of the kinds of campaigns that Development and Peace has done. The Nike Levi campaign of the mid-90s is a good example on the whole issue of sweatshops in the Global South. And before that campaign, sweatshops wasn't a word that was commonly sort of used. It certainly wasn't used in schools, but that's a campaign that really took off in schools. And to this day, I think there's a much more awareness of the whole concept. And certainly after the campaign, right away, there was people started talking about sweatshops. And I know that the school boards here are sort of looking at their policies around where school uniforms are made and things like that. It's a slow process. It's a path. It's a way. It's not, you don't find solutions. It's not an A, B, C of how to solve this, that, or the other. So I think Development and Peace over the years has engaged, you know, thousands and thousands of people, and I believe that many of those people did enter into a process. They may not still be involved with Development and Peace, you know, people come and go in those kinds of things. However, they would, I am sure, be maintaining the kinds of approaches, attitudes, and openness to global issues and understanding what our place is in those issues to this day and going forward.
Father Bill mentioned Pope Francis and his influence and all this, and I just wanted to ask you briefly, what do you think the arrival of Pope Francis and the emphasis on the kinds of things he's been talking about has done for the movement, Development and Peace, and the people involved?
Well, it's clearly been an incredible boost to people who are working in social justice in Canada. Development and Peace, also Kairos and the ecumenical movement, I think, have seen the benefits. But the very fact that Pope Francis came from Latin America, came from Argentina, that was huge, as we know, when it happened, and it's huge in terms of his approach to issues. I mean, he sees things from a different perspective because, you know, it happens that when he was in Argentina, he certainly was involved with different groups and people who were very poor, you know, people really on the margins. And he keeps that perspective with him, I think. It seems that he certainly shows that, and it's clear in his writings.
I think one of the most important things, it's not just for Development and Peace, is his realism. In other words, he's with the people, he's with the poor, and he won't let go. I mean, basically, whatever else happens, he's going to be with the people, and he keeps telling people that no matter what else they do, they have to be with the poor. And I know a lot of people, they don't see that. Well, yes, we're doing all this. Be with the poor.
That's it. We have to take one more break, but when we come back, some concluding thoughts from Anne-Marie and Father Bill. We'll be right back. At Salt and Light Television, we're interested in your perspective. Share your thoughts with us on Twitter and Facebook, and watch more episodes of Perspectives, the weekly edition, on our website, saltandlighttv.org/perspectives. Okay, we have a few minutes left. Let's look toward the future. When you think about the future of development and peace, perhaps another 50 years, what are you hoping to see?
Well, I think that time in some ways is ripe. No matter where you look today, there's uncertainties. And yet, you know, the only thing that has to work is love. It's got to be not just justice and freedom. And so I think what is happening now and with Pope Francis is that people begin to see more clearly how intimately their work for justice is related to, well, not just to solidarity, but to really spirituality, spiritual freedom, that they're open to think different thoughts and not lose it. And also that they are able to, in spite of looking at ugly reality in the face, they still can hope.
Anne-Marie, what about you?
I would hope that the membership would grow exponentially, but I also recognize that growing the membership of Development Peace is not an easy task, because it's not clear. Some people really understand the concepts around justice and about just, which is basically why are people poor, and asking the questions, but others find that difficult, and it's always been a challenge to engage people. But I'm sure that it will continue on for a long time to come, because it's just full of very many committed people, members, staff, and the partners in the Global South.
Mm. And it stems from gospel principles, right? So you can't get rid of that.
That's it.
Let me ask you a question about the work you do at the Jesuit Forum. Just tell us a little bit about it.
Well, it's interesting because it dovetails rather nicely with the work of Development and Peace. We don't do campaigning or engage in these precise kind of education as Development and Peace does, but we're tending to work more with people before perhaps they are involved with something like Development and Peace, to prepare them to be open. We're trying to open minds, in a sense, through small group process, through people listening to each other, through sharing and going more deeply on issues, starting with their own experience, but going out into the world, making those connections. And we hope that people who engage in our forums leave them just a little more open and ready to take up a campaign of Development and Peace or a similar kind of action.
Oh, it's very good work. I want to thank you both for coming in today and speaking to me about this great anniversary, this milestone reached by Development and Peace. Thank you very much.
Very pleased to be here.
Anne-Marie Jackson is director of the Jesuit Forum for Social Faith and Justice, based here in Toronto. And Father Bill Ryan is a Jesuit priest and economist who works with Anne-Marie as a special advisor to that Jesuit Forum. You can learn more about their work at jesuitforum.ca. They produce some really excellent resources for group-based discussion and action. And I want to draw your attention to just one of them, On Care for Our Common Home, a dialogue guide for Laudato Si. This is frankly the best resource out there to break open the Pope's ecology encyclical. And you can also get it right from their website. They publish a quarterly newsletter called Open Space, which we encourage you to sign up for. Again, their website is jesuitforum.ca. And that's all the time we have, but thanks very much for joining us. For Deacon Pedro, I'm Sebastian Gomes. Happy anniversary, Development and Peace. We'll see you again soon.